The Great Pyramid stands as a testament to a skill that later builders seemingly forgot. This is the central mystery of sudden material shifts in monument construction, a global pattern hinting at lost knowledge transfer. By the end, you will see ancient ruins not as static piles of stone, but as dynamic archives of human ingenuity and its startling fragility. Why would a civilization that mastered multi-ton granite blocks later settle for cruder, weaker materials? What catastrophic event or cultural rupture could make superior engineering simply vanish? We will journey from the obelisks of Egypt to the polygonal walls of Peru, tracing these architectural regressions that challenge everything we assume about progress. What foundational knowledge from our own time might be slipping away, unnoticed, even now? This architectural anomaly is a global signature, a quiet clue etched in stone across continents and centuries. It is not merely a change in style or preference, it is a tangible step backward in engineering capability. To understand it, think not of a slow, steady climb up a staircase of progress, but of someone reaching a high platform, only to inexplicably step down to a lower one. The materials become smaller, easier to handle. The joints between stones grow wider, requiring crude mortar to fill the gaps. The precision of cutting and fitting diminishes. This is the sudden material shift, and its presence asks a troubling question about the continuity of human knowledge. Archaeologist Mark Lehner, who has spent decades mapping the Giza Plateau, observes that these shifts often align with periods of political upheaval or economic strain. A new pharaoh takes power, resources become scarce, and so the scale of construction is reduced. This is the straightforward, logical explanation, but it only tells part of the story. Scaling down a project is one thing, completely forgetting how to cut and move regular. The joints between them are wide and filled with copious amounts of a weak, gypsum-based mortar. The builders seem to have lost the confidence or the ability to make stones fit together without a sticky filler. This material shift is a clear regression. The Old Kingdom pyramids used virtually no mortar, relying on perfect cuts to achieve stability. Later pyramids and temples used it abundantly, a telltale sign of declining precision. The story repeats in the quarry. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan, still attached to the bedrock, is a frozen moment in time. It shows how workers carved trenches around a single 800-ton piece of granite, using nothing but dolerite stone balls and a profound understanding of stone fracture points. This was a sophisticated, deliberate process, yet the technique appears to vanish. Later obelisks are smaller, and the methods for moving them seem cruder, relying more on brute manpower than on refined engineering. So what happened? Did a guild of master stoneworkers, the keepers of this precise knowledge, simply die out without passing on their secrets? Or was it something deeper, a loss of the geological savvy needed to identify the best quarries and the engineering principles required to move such monstrous weights? The silence along the Nile is deafening. It suggests that knowledge, even of something as solid as stone, is far more fragile than we think. And as we will see, this is not a story unique to Egypt. The same pattern of mastery and loss appears with startling clarity on the other side of the world. Across the ocean, a different mountain range tells a parallel story. High in the Andes, the fortress of Sacsayhuamán presents a stone wall that defies simple explanation. To stand before it is to feel a profound sense of dislocation in time. The stones here are not merely large, they are colossal, some weighing over 100 tons, yet their true mystery lies not in their mass but in their fit. These are polygonal blocks, each with a unique, irregular shape with multiple angles that lock together without mortar in a seamless, three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. The joints are so tight that not even a piece of paper can slide between them. This architectural choice was not merely aesthetic, it was brilliantly functional. For centuries, these walls have withstood powerful earthquakes that would topple modern concrete structures, the interlocking stones shifting and settling as a single, resilient entity. This represents a peak of Andean engineering, a mastery over stone that seems to belong to a different era than other constructions at the same sites. Contrast this with the residential sectors of Machu Picchu, built by the same Inca civilization. While still impressive, the masonry here is of a distinctly different character. The stones are smaller, rougher fieldstones, carefully fitted but set together with clay mortar. It is beautiful and skillful work, but it belongs to a different, more pragmatic order of construction. The shift is clear from the monumental, earthquake-proof polygonal perfection to more conventional, albeit masterful, stonework. Researcher Jean-Pierre Protzen spent years trying to replicate Inca stone-cutting techniques, concluding that with stone hammers and patient abrasion, the results were possible. Yet he and others acknowledge that the methods for the finest polygonal work, especially the initial shaping and transport of the megaliths, remain partially speculative. Legends and local oral histories sometimes speak of techniques lost to time, of plants that could soften stone, or of knowledge that allowed builders to make the massive rocks move with sound or vibration. Whether these stories hold a kernel of truth or are metaphorical, they point to a cultural memory of a capability that later generations could not fully reproduce. The organizational knowledge alone was staggering. Transporting a 100-ton block of andesite from a quarry miles away, across ravines and up steep slopes, required more than manpower. It required a symphony of logistics, rope-making, and terrain management that itself constituted a form of high civilization. Then the precision cutting began. A perfect icon of this lost precision is the famous stone of the 12 angles in a Cusco wall. It is a single block, meticulously carved to interlock with its neighbors on 12 distinct planes. This was not guesswork, it was applied geometry of the highest order, a testament to a deep, tactile understanding of material and form. So what happened? Did a cataclysm, a conquest, or a simple societal reorganization disrupt the guild of master builders who held this knowledge? Was the finer technique so resource-intensive that it was reserved only for the most sacred, royal, or strategic sites, and then forgotten when priorities changed? The walls stand silent, but their two different languages of stone speak volumes about a fracture in the chain of technical tradition. This pattern of a golden age of megalithic construction, followed by a shift to smaller, simpler methods, is now unmistakable. And as our search continues, we find it is not confined to the ancient world at all. A much more recent empire, one we think we know so well, displays the very same startling signature of forgotten genius. The cradle of civilization holds a different kind of stone, one baked from earth and water. In ancient Mesopotamia, the monumental shift is written not in granite, but in the humble brick. Here, the regression is a story of chemistry and logistics forgotten. The great ziggurats of and Uruk, those stairways to the heavens, were feats of mud-brick engineering that rivaled the stone pyramids in their ambition. Their builders didn't just stack clay, they engineered it. They produced millions of standardized, uniformly sized bricks, baked to perfection for strength. These bricks were then laid in sophisticated, interlocking patterns and bound together with a secret weapon, bitumen. This naturally occurring tar, collected from seeps in the earth, was heated and mixed to create a waterproof, incredibly durable mortar. The entire structure was a giant moisture management system, designed to withstand the elements and stand for millennia. This required more than strong backs. It demanded deep chemical knowledge and an administrative machine of staggering complexity. Archaeologist Harriet Crawford's work highlights the unseen infrastructure behind these monuments. To produce that volume of identical bricks, you needed centralized clay pits, standardized molds, vast fuel supplies for kilns, and armies of laborers, all coordinated by a scribble class keeping meticulous records. The bitumen itself had to be sourced, transported, and its recipes maintained. This was a civilization operating at peak bureaucratic and technical efficiency. Then something changed. Look at the monumental foundations of later Babylonian or Assyrian palaces and walls. The brickwork, while still impressive, tells a different story. The sizes become less uniform. The elegant, waterproof bonding patterns give way to simpler stacks. The use of high-quality bitumen mortar becomes sporadic, often replaced with weaker clay-based mixes. It's as if the precise recipe and the administrative will to enforce it had faded. The knowledge of how to distribute weight across a massive brick platform, a subtle architectural science, seems to have degraded. This is a crucial point. The later Ishtar Gate, with its breathtaking glazed bricks depicting dragons and bulls, proves that artistic and chemical knowledge could reach new heights in specialized areas. Yet the foundational engineering, the core discipline that held everything up, appears to have suffered. This suggests a terrifying possibility that the loss of bureaucratic knowledge of recipe books, supply chains, and quality control protocols can cripple a civilization's monumental ambition as completely as the loss of a physical tool. When the administrative glue that holds a complex society together dissolves, the technical knowledge it fostered often dissolves with it. This thread of collapse, of fragmented systems and forgotten processes, pulls our gaze from the river plains of Mesopotamia to the turbulent seas of the Bronze Age Mediterranean, where entire civilizations blinked out, taking their secrets to the deep. The echoes of a forgotten craft resonate in the very stones of mainland Greece. Centuries before the Parthenon, before democracy, a different power ruled here. The Mycenaeans built for the ages, and their signature was a style of masonry so immense. Later Greeks believed only the mythical Cyclopes, one-eyed giants, could have lifted the stones. This is the Cyclopean style, and its disappearance marks one of history's most profound material shifts. Walk through the Lion Gate at Mycenae. The entrance is dominated by a single triangular slab of limestone, carved with two majestic lions, resting upon a monolithic lintel stone. That lintel is estimated to weigh 20 tons. It is not merely placed there, it is perfectly seated, a keystone of intimidation and stability, set atop wall blocks that are themselves colossal, some weighing over 100 tons. The builders used these gigantic, roughly shaped boulders, fitting them together with smaller stones to fill the gaps, creating walls that were not just strong, but flexible, capable of surviving the seismic tremors common to the region. This was brute force guided by a deep, intuitive understanding of mass and balance. Then the lights went out. Historian Robert Drews links the loss of this building tradition directly to the late Bronze Age collapse, a turbulent period around 1200 B.C. when palatial centers across the eastern Mediterranean fell. Trade networks shattered, centralized economies crumbled, and with them vanished the guilds of specialized craftsmen, the engineers, the master quarrymen, the logisticians who knew how to manage such projects. The knowledge didn't just retire, it was scattered to the winds. When Greek culture re-emerged centuries later in the Archaic period, its architectural ethos was fundamentally different. Look at the foundations of an early temple. The masonry is beautiful, precise, but it speaks a new language. The stones are smaller, quarried into regular, rectangular ashlar blocks. They are joined with meticulous care, often using metal clamps poured with lead to lock them together. This is a technology of precision cutting and metalworking, not of megalithic movement. The Cyclopean technique relied on minimal shaping, using the inherent weight and interlocking form of the stones for stability. The later Greek method relied on perfect geometry and artificial fasteners. It is a shift from a philosophy of mass to a philosophy of meticulous assembly. Consider the engineering inside the so-called Treasury of Atreus, a magnificent Tholos tomb at Mycenae. Its interior is a soaring Corbel dome where each ring of stone slightly overlaps the one below, creating a vault that stands without any central support. This was a structural masterpiece, a peak of engineering that would not be matched in scale or technique for over 1,000 years. So what truly happened? Was the knowledge of moving 20-ton lintels simply too expensive, too labor-intensive for the fledgling city-states of archaic Greece, leading to a conscious choice to build differently? Or was the art of calculating leverage points, of maneuvering mega-blocks with rollers, ropes, and earth ramps, irretrievably buried in the dark age that separated the two cultures? The silent testimony of the stones suggests the latter. The later Greeks inherited the legends of the giants who built the walls, but not the practical, hands-on wisdom of how it was actually done. This forces us to confront the fragile vessels of human knowledge and ask how something so monumental, so tangible, could ever be forgotten. The master mason did not consult a written manual. His library was a lifetime of calloused hands and a trained eye. In the dust of an Egyptian quarry, knowledge lived not on papyrus, but in the body. It was passed through gesture and rhythm, through a song that set the pace for a team pulling a rope, through the subtle shift in pressure on a copper chisel that told him the granite was about to fracture correctly. This was tacit knowledge, a deep, intuitive understanding that resided in the individual and the tight-knit guild. Anthropologist David Turnbull describes such pre-literal engineering knowledge as situated and embodied. It was inseparable from the specific place, the specific stone, and the specific community of practice that nurtured it. This made it incredibly powerful, but also heartbreakingly fragile. The guild system was the vessel for this knowledge. Masters guarded their techniques as sources of prestige and power, teaching them only to trusted apprentices over decades. This secrecy maintained quality and commanded high prices, but it created a single point of failure. If a guild was suddenly disbanded by conquest, or if a plague wiped out its senior members before they could pass on the deepest secrets, that knowledge vanished overnight. It was not stored anywhere else. Consider the medieval cathedral builders of Europe. Their Masonic lodges held complex geometrical secrets for vaulting and stress distribution, knowledge passed down through generations. After the catastrophe of the Black Death in the 14th century, which decimated populations and disrupted these chains of mentorship, the techniques for building on such a scale became rarer, and some styles of construction were never quite replicated with the same fluency. The system relied on more than just skilled hands. It depended on stable, long-term patronage. A pharaoh who commissioned a 20-year project provided not just funding, but a living university. Apprentices could learn on the job, making mistakes under guidance, gradually absorbing the feel of the craft. If that patronage dried up for a generation, the entire educational continuum collapsed. There is also a crucial distinction to be made between two kinds of knowing. Procedural knowledge is the how, the sequence of steps to shape a block. Explanatory knowledge is the why, the understanding of leverage, material stress, and geometry that allows you to adapt the procedure to a new problem. Guilds often excelled at the procedural, the perfected recipe, but if the explanatory principles were not also communicated, the knowledge became a rigid script, unable to survive unexpected change. So we must ask, looking at our own world, does our modern system make us safer from such loss? We have digitized everything from architectural plans to metallurgical formulas. Our knowledge is explicit, stored on servers and in textbooks. This seems robust, but it creates a different vulnerability. If the society that maintains those servers and teaches those textbooks were to face a severe discontinuity, how many of us could actually do what the files describe? The embodied knowledge of crafting, of sensing material failure, of improvising without a manual, that still resides in a shrinking class of skilled tradespeople. Our resilience is now a question of energy grids and digital access, a new kind of fragility. This vulnerability becomes terrifyingly clear when we trace knowledge not just to the builder's hand, but to the very source of the stone itself. The master mason's hands knew the stone, but his mind held a map. This leads us to a different kind of vanishing, one not of technique but of geography. Perhaps the sudden material shift wasn't just about forgetting how to cut, but about losing the way to the quarry itself. The knowledge of where to find the perfect stone was a science and a sacred trust, and its loss could cripple a civilization's ambition as surely as any forgotten tool. Consider the silent, enduring mystery of Stonehenge. Its iconic outer ring is made of sarsen stones, a local sandstone, but its inner horseshoe is built from distinctive bluestones, a type of spotted dolerite. Geological analysis has traced these bluestones with near certainty to specific outcrops in the Preseli Hills of Wales, a staggering distance of over 140 miles. This was not a random choice from the nearest riverbed. It implies a deep, intimate familiarity with a distant landscape, a knowledge of where to find rock with the ideal properties for shaping and standing the test of time. Geologist John A. Webb notes that ancient builders, through generations of observation, learned to identify stones with superior compressive strength and resistance to weathering. They weren't just picking rocks, they were selecting geologic partners for eternity. This knowledge was multifaceted. Sometimes the choice was symbolic. The red granite quarried at Aswan in Egypt was not just strong, it was sacred, believed to be the petrified blood of the god Osiris and representing the primordial mound of creation. To use it was to imbue a monument with divine power. In other cases, it was purely functional, a quest for the hardest basalt for grinding grain or the most resonant limestone for a bell tower. But what happens when that map is erased? If conflict severs a trade route, or if environmental change makes a quarry inaccessible, or if the guild that held the secret locations simply dissolves, builders are left with only local options. They must make do with softer sandstone instead of granite, with crumbly limestone instead of tight-grained andesite. The monument that results is not a choice, but a compromise dictated by a shrunken world. This shift from deep shaft quarrying to surface gathering is another telltale sign. Extracting a perfect, monolithic block from the heart of a mountain requires profound geologic savvy to find clean seams and avoid fractures. Grabbing boulders from a hillside is a simpler but far more limiting approach. The Roman Empire provides a stark, later example. Their architecture relied on specific materials like travertine from Tivoli and marble from Carrara, hauled across a vast network of roads and sea lanes. When the Western Empire fragmented, that network collapsed. The knowledge of how to access and transport those premium materials didn't vanish overnight, but the economic and political will to do so evaporated. The quarries fell silent. Builders in the early Middle Ages, even when attempting grand structures, were often forced to scavenge stone from Roman ruins, a literal and symbolic step back. So we must look at a monument's material as a potential fingerprint. It can point to a lost trade alliance, a forgotten pilgrimage route, or a spiritual landscape that once held meaning. When the stone changes abruptly, it may signal that the builder's world has suddenly become smaller, their connections to a wider, more resource-rich geography severed. This loss of the map forces a regression in capability, but it also hints at something deeper, a severing of a monument from its intended meaning. The stone itself was not just a tool, it was a participant in the sacred. This layer of meaning adds a profound complication to our search. for a sudden material shift might signal not a loss of skill, but a revolution of the spirit. In Mesoamerica, the colossal stone heads of the Olmec civilization, carved from single blocks of volcanic basalt, radiate an eternal, imposing power. Centuries later, the Maya built soaring pyramids, but they often used a core of rubble faced with cut limestone and finished with brilliant, painted stucco. This was not a regression in ambition, but a shift in artistic and ritual expression. The Maya world was one of vivid color and narrative, where stucco provided a canvas for intricate murals and sculpted facades that told stories of gods and kings. As art historian Mary Miller has illustrated, materials were chosen for their symbolic properties. Jade was more precious than gold, representing life, water, and the soul. Obsidian, with its razor edge and volcanic origin, was the sacred material of ritual blades and mirrors for divination. The choice was theological. We must consider the cosmology embedded in the material. In many ancient worldviews, stone was eternal, the bones of the earth, connecting a structure to the primordial and the divine. To build with megaliths was to create a permanent conduit to the ancestors, an unchanging testament to a king's power that would endure as long as the world itself. Clay and brick, by contrast, were malleable, born from earth and water, fired by human hands. They represented a different relationship with the cosmos, one of cyclical renewal rather than eternal stasis. A shift from one to the other could reflect a fundamental change in how a culture saw its place in the universe. Conquest, too, imposes new aesthetics. When a new power rises, it often builds its temples and palaces in its own style, with the materials of its homeland, or to demonstrate its control over local resources. The old sacred stones of the defeated might be deliberately toppled or reused as mere foundation filler, a spiritual as well as a physical dismantling. This introduces a haunting possibility that what we interpret as lost technical knowledge might in fact be lost ritual knowledge. Legends from the Andes to the Pacific speak of plants or songs that could soften stone, allowing it to be shaped like clay. While often dismissed as myth, these stories might preserve a memory of a ceremonial process, a sacred protocol that accompanied the physical work. The knowledge lost may not have been the chisel's angle, but the prayer that was spoken before the strike, the offering that made the mountain willing to yield its children. The Greek world makes this symbolism clear. The Parthenon was built of luminous Pentelic marble to honor Athena, its columns designed to appear perfectly straight to the human eye, a monument to divine wisdom and civic pride. Centuries earlier, the Mycenaeans built their fortifications from massive, rugged limestone, stone chosen for its defensive strength, for its assertion of raw, earthly power. The material choice was never neutral, it was a declaration, so our search grows more complex. When we see a shift from megalithic to modular construction, are we witnessing the collapse of an engineering guild, or the ascent of a new priesthood with a different vision of the sacred? Are we looking for a forgotten tool or a forgotten rite? To untangle the technological from the theological, we must finally turn to the most direct evidence of all, the physical instruments that shaped these ancient worlds. The stones themselves hold the final, undeniable testimony. Look closely at the surface of an Old Kingdom granite sarcophagus. In certain places, the cut is not jagged or chipped, but eerily smooth with a subtle, concave curve, as if the rock had been hollowed out like butter. This is the signature of a tube drill, a hollow cylinder of copper or bronze, spun with a bow while an abrasive slurry of sand and water was fed under it. The sand's quartz particles, harder than the granite, did the actual cutting, grinding a perfect circular channel. Now compare that to a granite block from a later Ptolemaic temple. The surface is pitted and scarred with the sharp, linear marks of a flat chisel, a slower, less precise method that leaves a completely different forensic fingerprint. This is not a stylistic choice, it is a technological regression written in stone. master stonemason and researcher Roger Hopkins spent years attempting to replicate these ancient cuts using period-appropriate tools. His experiments revealed something profound. To achieve the smooth, flat surfaces on massive granite blocks, the ancient workers didn't just have good tools, they possessed a deep, intuitive grasp of material physics. They understood exactly how much pressure to apply, the ideal speed for the cutting stroke, and how to constantly refresh the abrasive slurry to prevent the tool from glazing over and losing its bite. This was a high-level craft, a form of applied science passed through hands, not books. We can catalog these clues like a detective at a crime scene. Look for the presence of precise, cylindrical dowel holes, perfectly drilled to accept metal or stone pins that locked blocks together, a feature common in early Cyclopean walls but absent in cruder later constructions. Notice the small, protruding lifting bosses left on the sides of megaliths at places like Baalbek in Lebanon and Ollantaytambo in Peru. These knobs weren't decorative, they were practical handles, points for attaching ropes or levers to maneuver the block into its final position with incredible control, a technique that vanishes from the archaeological record in subsequent building phases. Examine the columns. Some early Egyptian and Greek columns show faint, spiral striations, potential evidence of being turned on a simple lathe to achieve their perfect symmetry, while later versions are clearly hand-carved with inevitable imperfections. Even the abrasive tells a story. By analyzing the microscopic particles embedded in ancient cut surfaces, researchers can sometimes identify the specific type of sand used, tracing it to a distant riverbed or beach, revealing a supply chain for a consumable resource that was critical to the technology. This forensic evidence forces a haunting and very practical question. If these advanced methods, these tube drills and complex leverage systems, demonstrably existed, where are all the tools? We find simple copper chisels by the thousands, but the sophisticated apparatus implied by the stonework is conspicuously absent from the archaeological record. It leads to a fascinating possibility. Perhaps the most important tools were not made of metal, but of knowledge and perishable material. The real technology was the recipe for the perfect abrasive slurry, the design of the wooden lifting cradle that rotted away, the precise sequence of chants and coordinated pulls that moved a stone, a social technology that left no physical trace. Or it points us toward more speculative realms. Could some techniques have relied on locally available plants or chemical compounds that could temporarily alter the surface hardness of stone, methods lost when the botanical knowledge or the cultural context for their use faded away? The absence of the hardware forces us to consider that the lost technology might have been softer, more organic, and far more fragile than we ever assumed. The forensic evidence in the stonework leads us to a crossroads of interpretation. We have catalogued the missing tools and the forgotten techniques, but some of the precision we see seems to defy the conventional toolkit entirely. This brings us to the speculative realm, a space where researchers ask if our entire understanding of ancient capability might be incomplete. A fascinating artifact found in 1936 near Baghdad provides a provocative frame. It consists of a clay jar, a copper cylinder, and an iron rod, and when filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar, it produces a small electrical charge. Dubbed the Baghdad Battery by some, its true purpose remains debated. Was it used for electroplating for medical therapy, or was it simply a storage vessel? The point is not to claim ancient Egyptians had power grids, but to illustrate a profound humility. If a simple electrochemical cell could exist 2,000 years ago and be misinterpreted for decades, what other forms of practical knowledge, based on principles we haven't considered, might have been lost? This opens the door to theories that attempt to explain the inexplicable smoothness and precision in certain monuments. Researcher John Anthony West famously pointed to tool marks on statues and sarcophagi that, to his eye, suggested the use of advanced machinery like diamond-tipped saws in a time before such technology was supposed to exist. His work, while controversial and rejected by many Egyptologists, forces a vital question. Are we only looking for the tools we expect to find based on our own technological lineage? Could the lost knowledge involve methods we wouldn't even think to look for? Folklore from around the world whispers of alternative possibilities. Legends from South America speak of a plant, its juice capable of softening stone so it could be molded like clay. While it sounds like pure myth, modern experiments have shown that certain organic acids, like oxalic acid from common plants, can indeed significantly degrade the surface of silicate rocks, making them easier to work with simple tools. This isn't magic, it's applied chemistry, a form of knowledge easily lost if the specific botanical recipe faded from use. Other traditions hint at a knowledge of sound. Stories from multiple cultures, including Tibetan and Inca, describe the use of acoustic levitation, where chants, drums, or trumpets were used to make massive stones weightless and guide them into place. While no scientific evidence supports stones floating on sound waves, acoustic resonance is a powerful physical force that can organize sand into intricate patterns. It is not a huge leap to consider that ancient builders might have discovered resonant frequencies that could help fracture quarry stone along clean lines, or synchronize the efforts of hundreds of laborers pulling a rope, turning a chaotic effort into a single, efficient pulse. Even in the British Isles, there are mysteries that resist simple tool-based explanations. The vitrified forts of Scotland, Iron Age hilltop structures, feature sections of stone ramparts that have been fused into a glassy slag by heat so intense it exceeds what a simple wood fire could produce. How was this achieved, and why? No conventional explanation is entirely satisfactory. These speculative threads remind us that the past may hold surprises that our modern, materialist paradigm is ill-equipped to see. Mainstream archaeology rightly demands evidence, but its focus is often on finding the physical hammer and chisel. What if the most important technology was a recipe, a song, or a vibrational principle that left no durable trace? This detour into possibility is not about proving wild theories, but about expanding our sense of what knowledge can be. It challenges the assumption that technological progress is a single, linear ladder. Perhaps it is more like a tree with many branches, some of which grew long ago and then withered, their fruits forgotten. To solve the mystery of the material shift, we must be willing to look for the missing branches, while firmly acknowledging that the most likely cause of their loss lies not in fantasy, but in the all-too-real and devastating collapse of the societies that nurtured them. The forensic search for missing tools leads us to a stark and sobering truth. Sometimes knowledge isn't quietly forgotten, it is violently erased by the collapse of the very world that created it. The most compelling and widely accepted explanation for sudden material shifts is the catastrophic failure of a complex society itself. To understand this, we must look to a pivotal moment in human history, a period of unraveling so profound it serves as a case study in lost knowledge. Around 1200 B.C., the vibrant, interconnected world of the late Bronze Age Mediterranean began to implode. Imagine a network of glittering palace economies, from Mycenaean Greece to the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, all linked by thriving trade in copper, tin, and luxury goods. Then, within a few generations, the lights went out, palaces were burned and abandoned, long-distance trade routes dissolved into silence, the linear B script of the Mycenaeans and the cuneiform of the Hittites fell out of use, a literal loss of written language. In this swirling chaos, the specialized, state-sponsored knowledge of megalithic construction didn't stand a chance. It was a luxury that could not be sustained. Historian Eric H. Klein, in his work on this period, describes it not as a single event, but as a perfect storm of interconnected failures. Climate change likely caused droughts and crop failures. Earthquakes shattered cities already under strain. Migrations and conflicts, perhaps by groups we call the Sea Peoples, overwhelmed weakened kingdoms. The system experienced a cascade failure, and in that collapse, the conditions necessary for monumental building vanished. First, the concentrated surplus vanished. Mega projects require a massive, organized food surplus to feed thousands of specialized laborers who are not farming. They require a bureaucracy to manage them and a stable state to protect the worksite. When the palace economy crumbled, that surplus and organization evaporated overnight. Second, the artisan class was dispersed or lost. The master engineers, the quarry foremen, the scribes who calculated loads, these were elite specialists often attached to the royal court. Some may have perished in the violence, others fled, their guild structure broken, their knowledge becoming irrelevant in a world now focused solely on subsistence farming and defense. The result is clear in the archaeological record of Greece. After the Mycenaean palaces fell, there is a period of centuries often called the Greek Dark Ages. Building in cut stone for monumental purposes virtually ceases. Communities lived in smaller, simpler settlements. The sophisticated art of corbeling vaults and moving 20-ton lintels was not merely paused, it was extinguished. When Greek culture re-emerged centuries later, it had to reinvent its architectural language almost from scratch, resulting in the smaller, modular ashlar blocks of the archaic period. This is the macro force of collapse. It doesn't just pause progress, it actively dismantles the complex ecosystem that allows certain forms of high knowledge to exist. It severs the chain of transmission completely. This leads to a sobering reflection for our own time. Our globalized, interconnected civilization feels stable, its knowledge seemingly preserved forever in digital clouds. But it too is a complex system, reliant on energy grids, international supply chains, and institutional stability. Are we truly immune to a cascade failure, perhaps through a combination of pandemic, climate disruption, and geopolitical fracture, that could render certain forms of our own advanced knowledge suddenly inaccessible? The stones of the Bronze Age remind us that no civilization is permanent, and the knowledge it holds is only as resilient as the society that nurtures it. Yet collapse is a force of chaos. Sometimes the disruption of knowledge is not an accident of history, but a deliberate act of conquest. The Spanish conquistadors did not just build on the land, they built on the meaning of the land itself. In the heart of Cusco, the Church of Santo Domingo rises on the unshakable, curved foundation walls of the Inca temple Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun. The Spanish masonry above is of smaller, rougher bricks, bound with thick mortar, a stark visual contrast to the seamless, mortarless stonework below. This is not a case of lost knowledge, but of knowledge deliberately overwritten. It is a physical metaphor for cultural superimposition, where the new power imposes its architectural language directly atop the old to demonstrate a new spiritual and political order. As post-colonial scholar Michael Dietler has explored, material culture becomes a primary battlefield in such conquests. The monument is not just a building, it is a statement. To erase the old symbols, you must first dismantle the systems that created them. This can involve the deliberate destruction of sacred quarries, severing the material connection to the landscape. It can mean the enslavement, killing, or dispersal of the guilds of master builders, breaking the chain of technical transmission at its source. The knowledge isn't forgotten, it is actively suppressed, its practitioners removed from the equation. The new regime then imposes its own aesthetic and religious standards, which demand entirely different materials and forms. Christian churches across the conquered Americas required brick, timber, and plaster to create their vaulted naves and frescoed interiors, forms alien to the indigenous stone working traditions that focused on solidity and earthbound integration. A more ancient example echoes this pattern. In 70 AD, Roman legions under Titus destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem, the spiritual center of Jewish life. Later, the Romans built a colony, Aelia Capitolina, on the site, employing their own engineering, standardized concrete, arches, and grid-pattern streets to physically and symbolically stamp the landscape with Roman order. The local knowledge of Herodian stone cutting, famed for its precision, did not vanish from a lack of skill, but was rendered politically and spiritually obsolete by the overwhelming force of the empire. This forces a difficult but essential question. When we look at a sudden material shift in the archaeological record, how many are passive regressions from societal collapse, and how many are the direct result of this active cultural erasure? How many lost techniques were not lost at all, but were outlawed, their masters silenced, and their sacred materials declared profane? The answer is likely a complex tapestry of both. Yet conquest is a blunt, violent instrument. Sometimes the driver of change is quieter, more insidious, and ultimately more pervasive than the sword. It is the slow, relentless pressure of a changing economy that makes the old ways not impossible, but simply not worth the cost. Our own world holds a powerful analogy for this choice. We possess more than enough technology and resources to construct a new Great Pyramid of Giza. The knowledge of structural engineering, logistics, and machinery is readily available. Yet, no nation on Earth chooses to allocate its wealth and labor toward such a project. Instead, we pour those same resources into satellites, microchips, and sprawling digital networks. This is not a loss of capability, but a profound shift in priorities. The pyramid no longer offers a sufficient return on the monumental investment required. This exact economic calculation may explain many of the material shifts we see in antiquity. What if the move away from megaliths was not a forgetting, but a strategic decision? What if smaller, modular blocks represented a brilliant innovation in efficiency rather than a regression in skill? Economist Joseph Tainter, who studies the collapse of complex societies, frames monumental building as a massive investment of surplus energy. A civilization undertakes such projects to solve problems, often to promote social cohesion, demonstrate elite power, or appease the gods. But that investment must yield a return. When the costs begin to outweigh the perceived benefits, when the social or political payoff diminishes, the practice stops. It becomes economically irrational. To understand this, we must think in practical terms. Consider the labor calculation for a single polygonal block in an Inca wall. Quarrying that irregular 100-ton stone, transporting it miles across mountainous terrain, and then painstakingly shaping it to interlock perfectly with its unique neighbors would require thousands of person-days of highly skilled work. Now consider a standard rectangular ashlar block. It can be quarried more quickly from a predictable seam. Its uniform shape allows for faster transport and stacking, and it can be placed by less specialized laborers. The shift from the first to the second is a dramatic increase in build speed and a decrease in cost. It is a rational choice for a society that still wants impressive, durable structures, but needs to build more of them faster. This logic is seen clearly in the Roman world. Early Republican temples were built from massive blocks of travertine, requiring traditional stoneworking mastery. But as the empire exploded in size, the demand for infrastructure, aqueducts, harbors, amphitheaters skyrocketed. The Romans innovated. They developed concrete, a revolutionary binding agent made from volcanic ash, lime, and rubble. Suddenly, builders could pour immense, strong structures like the Pantheon's dome, using less skilled labor to fill wooden forms with this liquid stone. For many applications, concrete made multi-ton stone blocks obsolete. It was faster, cheaper, and more versatile. The facing of these concrete cores often shifted to small, modular bricks, which were easy to produce in bulk and required minimal cutting skill. This was a superior, scalable technology for empire building. Yet, it undeniably represented a move away from the hands-on mastery of cutting and fitting monumental stone. The very nature of labor also changed. Many early megalithic projects relied on corvée labor, a system where the state conscripted citizens for temporary duty. This was effectively a tax paid in work. Later societies increasingly moved toward systems of wage labor or specialized guilds. Paying skilled workers to cut smaller blocks for a longer period might have become more economically efficient than marshalling a colossal, temporary army of conscripts for a single mega-project. The economic rationale forces a vital, humbling question. Are we, as modern observers, romanticizing lost knowledge that was simply and rationally abandoned? Are we mistaking a strategic pivot for a catastrophic forgetting? The haunting perfection of a polygonal wall speaks to our awe, but the swift rise of a city built with concrete and brick speaks to pragmatic need. To find the answer, we cannot look only at what was no longer built. We must search for evidence that the underlying knowledge was still understood, preserved not in monuments but in other, subtler forms. The stones are silent, but the stories are not. Across the world, the memory of impossible construction lives on in folklore, a whisper of lost technique passed down through generations. Every culture that built with megalith seems to have a story explaining how it was done, and these tales often share a strange family resemblance. There is the global motif of a golden age, when giants or gods walked the earth and built with massive stones. There are recurring legends of stones being moved by the power of song, or shaped by magical plants that could soften rock like clay. For a long time, these were dismissed as pure fantasy, the charming inventions of pre-scientific minds. But what if they are something else entirely? Folklorist Adrian Mayer, who specializes in finding ancient science within myth, suggests that such narratives often preserve a kernel of technological truth. They are metaphorical containers for real but forgotten processes that later generations could no longer fully comprehend. Consider the wizard Merlin from Arthurian legend. Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century wrote that Merlin used his magic to transport the massive stones of Stonehenge from Ireland to Salisbury Plain. To a medieval audience, this was sorcery. To a modern researcher, it reads like a mythologized account of a long-distance megalithic transport operation. Its methods so advanced they seemed supernatural to those who came later. In the Andes, Inca legends speak of a magical liquid derived from a plant that could soften stone so workers could mold it into place. While it sounds like fantasy, we know that certain organic acids can significantly degrade the surface of silicate rocks, making them easier to work. The story could be preserving the memory of a real botanical recipe, a form of applied chemistry lost when the cultural context for its use faded away. Even biblical references to the Nephilim, the giants who existed before the Great Flood, echo this theme. They are often interpreted as a folk memory of an earlier, more powerful race whose monumental ruins, like the Cyclopean walls later attributed to the Anakim, seemed impossibly large to the nomadic Hebrews entering Canaan. The most direct example comes from Greece itself. The massive walls of Mycenae were so baffling to the later classical Greeks that they believed only the one-eyed Cyclopes could have built them. This myth, which gave us the term Cyclopean masonry, likely encodes a genuine cultural memory. It remembers a pre-Greek building culture, the Mycenaeans, whose techniques for moving multi-ton lintels had vanished during the Dark Ages. The myth isn't a factual account, but it is a testament. It marks the spot where knowledge disappeared, filling the void with a story of giants because no ordinary human, in their time, could conceive of such a feat. This leads to a profound shift in perspective. What if we began to treat these ancient myths not as mere fables, but as potential, albeit poetic, technical manuals? What clues might we find if we listened to them with the ear of an engineer, rather than a literary critic? the legend of stones moved by song might point to the use of rhythmic chanting to synchronize the pull of hundreds of laborers, turning chaos into efficient, coordinated force. The story of magical plants might point to lost geochemical knowledge. These narratives become a kind of cultural backup drive, storing the awe of a technology in the only format durable enough to survive societal collapse, the story. This bridge from myth to potential reality doesn't lead to a world of magic, but to a far more intriguing possibility that our ancestors' technical ingenuity may have branched in directions we have since forgotten. And when the same motifs appear in stories from opposite sides of the globe, it forces us to look for a connection deeper than coincidence. The recurring motifs in global folklore point toward a shared human experience of awe, but they also invite a far more controversial question. What if the parallels in stone are not just stories, but a physical echo of something real? Could the uncanny similarities in megalithic precision, from the polygonal walls of Peru to the submerged terraces of Japan's Yonaguni, suggest not independent genius but a common, forgotten teacher? This is the provocative heart of the theory of a global precursor civilization. Authors like Graham Hancock have popularized the idea of a sophisticated Ice Age culture, perhaps centered on a now submerged continent or a maritime network, which possessed advanced knowledge of astronomy, navigation, and stonework. According to this narrative, a catastrophic event at the end of the last Ice Age, around 12,800 years ago, shattered this civilization. Its scattered survivors, the theory goes, became the civilizing gods of legend, seeding the foundational knowledge of agriculture, architecture, and astronomy among hunter-gatherer societies worldwide, kickstarting the sudden rise of cultures like the Egyptians and the Maya. The evidence presented is often circumstantial but compelling. Proponents point to the geometric and astronomical alignments found at sites separated by oceans, like the Great Pyramid and Teotihuacan. They highlight submerged structures such as the potential complex off the coast of Yonaguni or the Bimini Road, which seem to challenge established timelines of human development. Most powerfully, they ask how cultures with no known contact independently arrived at the same brilliant solution of polygonal, mortarless masonry, a technique that appears in the Andes and, curiously, at a few select Hellenistic sites in Greece like Delphi. Is this a smoking gun for a shared source of knowledge? Mainstream archaeology offers a firm and very different answer. Researchers like Flint Dibble emphasize the immense span of human prehistory, arguing that 10,000 years is more than enough time for ideas to travel and be reinvented through known, albeit slow, routes of cultural diffusion. They point to the undeniable ingenuity of ancient peoples, capable of solving similar engineering problems when faced with similar challenges, like earthquake resistance. The polygonal style, they argue, is a logical, convergent solution for building stable walls in seismically active regions, not a handed-down blueprint. The counter-argument is one of evidence or the lack thereof. For a global maritime civilization, where is the pottery, the tools, the middens, the unambiguous settlement remains? The archaeological record shows gradual, local development, not a sudden infusion of complete knowledge packages. The submerged structures remain hotly debated, with many geologists attributing their forms to natural processes. This grand theory forces a critical choice in perspective. Is the idea of a lost global precursor a necessary explanation for the material shifts we see, filling a gap in our understanding? Or is it itself a modern myth, a story that underestimates the profound and repeated ingenuity of isolated human cultures? Perhaps the value of the theory is not in proving a forgotten Atlantis, but in the questions it makes us ask. It pushes us to look harder at the gaps in the record and to reconsider the capabilities of our ancestors. It also refines our focus toward a more tangible, testable mystery. If these diverse cultures did not share a common teacher, how did they so consistently arrive at building methods that share one spectacular, measurable trait, an almost supernatural resilience to the very forces that destroy our own modern constructions? The ground shakes with a violence that can topple cities, yet some ancient walls merely sway, as if in a slow, silent dance. This seismic resilience is perhaps the most compelling practical evidence of a forgotten engineering intelligence. In the heart of Cusco, during powerful Andean earthquakes, the polygonal Inca walls are observed to shift and settle, the intricate stones rocking in their locked embrace before settling back into perfect alignment. Directly above them, the colonial Spanish buildings of mortar and brick often suffer severe cracks or collapse. The old foundation holds, the newer construction fails. This isn't magic, it's applied physics on a monumental scale, and it suggests a deep, possibly intuitive, grasp of dynamics and energy dissipation that later builders did not inherit. Structural engineer Peter James, who has studied ancient monuments from Egypt to Peru, notes a critical distinction. Modern and many post-antique structures are rigid. They use hard mortar to bind materials into a single, unyielding mass. When seismic waves hit, that rigidity becomes a weakness, the energy with nowhere to go but to crack the structure apart. The finest ancient dry stone construction, by contrast, is flexible. The stones are not glued, they are carefully balanced. The interlocking polygonal shapes and the slight inward lean of the walls create a dynamic system. During a tremor, the stones can micro-shift, absorbing and dispersing the energy through friction and movement. Then gravity pulls them back into place. It is a brilliant, passive form of earthquake engineering. The knowledge went beyond the wall itself. It began with the selection of the stone, choosing types with a degree of inherent flexibility or resilience. It extended to the foundation, where builders often employed deep, layered gravel beds or complex drainage systems to prevent soil liquefaction, the dangerous phenomenon where solid ground turns to fluid under seismic stress. A stark modern example of this principle in action was seen during the 2015 earthquake in Nepal. While many modern concrete buildings pancaked ancient multi-tiered pagodas, built with intricate timber lattices that allowed the structures to sway like a flexible spine, remained standing. These were not primitive methods, they were sophisticated solutions born from long observation and hard-won experience. This practical superiority forces a difficult reflection. When societies shifted to faster, more decorative, or more symbolically aligned building methods, did they inadvertently abandon these life-saving principles? Was the knowledge of seismic flexibility so tied to the specific, time-intensive craft of megalithic construction that it could not be translated into the new languages of brick and mortar? The intersection of knowledge and disaster preparedness becomes a poignant lens. A community that forgets how to build for its environment doesn't just lose an art form, it loses a vital layer of resilience. This raises the haunting possibility that the very stability of the land itself, the environmental context that first demanded such ingenious solutions, might have been the trigger for the knowledge's disappearance. The forest itself was a kind of scaffolding, and when it vanished, the stones could no longer rise. Environmental change is the silent, slow-motion thief of knowledge, not through conquest or collapse, but through the gradual erosion of the very resources that make advanced techniques possible. Consider the Maya Classic period, a golden age of soaring pyramids and vibrant cities. Their architectural signature was not bare stone, but brilliant color. They faced their limestone cores with thick layers of painted stucco, a plaster made from burning limestone in great kilns. This process required staggering amounts of firewood. Paleoclimatologists like Gerald Horg have studied sediment cores from the region, finding evidence that prolonged drought cycles placed immense stress on Maya society. Now layer on the ecological demand of monument building. To produce the lime for stucco and mortar, vast tracts of forest were cleared. This deforestation likely accelerated soil erosion, reduced local rainfall through lost transpiration, and created a vicious cycle. As the environment degraded, the societal energy required to maintain the monumental building campaign became unsustainable. The quality and scale of construction didn't just stop, it appears to have diminished over time, a material shift driven not by forgotten blueprints, but by a changing landscape that could no longer support the old ways. The knowledge of how to make stucco didn't disappear, the sustainable means to produce it at scale did. This principle extends to the most fundamental tools of megalithic construction. Imagine the specific timber required for the massive lever systems and ramps used to raise an Egyptian obelisk. It wasn't just any wood, it needed to be strong, flexible, and long. The depletion of ancient cedar forests in Lebanon, prized across the ancient Near East, didn't just affect shipbuilding. It removed a key material from the engineering toolkit. Similarly, the transport of megaliths often relied on waterways. The silting of a crucial river, whether from deforestation upstream or natural climate shifts, could sever the logistical artery for moving 100-ton blocks, rendering the entire method obsolete overnight. Even the humble brick relies on a stable environment. The quality of clay is highly dependent on consistent rainfall and mineral deposits. A prolonged drought or a change in flood patterns could degrade the local clay sources, forcing builders to use poorer materials or more mortar to compensate, leaving behind a telltale signature of decline in the walls themselves. The most haunting case study is Ishtar Island. Here, a society devoted immense cultural energy to carving and erecting the iconic Moai statues. The prevailing theory, supported by pollen analysis, suggests that the island was once forested. This timber was almost certainly used for the elaborate systems to transport and raise the massive stone figures. As the population grew and tree clearing continued for agriculture, statue transport, and fuel, the forest reached a point of no return. When the last great tree fell, the knowledge of how to move a moai was not forgotten. It was rendered utterly useless. The statues in the quarry were abandoned mid-transport, a frozen tableau of knowledge that had suddenly become irrelevant to survival. The society that remained faced a brutal adaptation to a denuded landscape, its monumental phase terminally closed by ecological exhaustion. This environmental lens reframes our entire search. When we see a shift from finely fitted stone to crude rubble, are we looking at a loss of engineering genius, or are we witnessing the pragmatic adaptation of a society to a diminished world? The knowledge may have still existed in living memory, but the cost of implementing it in timber, in water, in stable soil had become impossibly high. The builders didn't forget how to do it, they could simply no longer afford to. This draws a poignant line from the past to our present. Our global civilization is built on a resource base we often take for granted. What forms of our own sophisticated knowledge would become mere theoretical curiosities if a single critical resource became scarce or vanished? The stones ask us to consider knowledge not as an abstract library, but as a living practice, deeply rooted in a specific and generous earth. And when that relationship fractures, the most profound loss may not be of the method itself, but of the world that made the method meaningful. A volcano can erase more than a city. It can erase an entire way of thinking. The cataclysmic eruption of Thera, modern-day Santorini, around 1600 BCE, offers a stark template for how knowledge vanishes. This was not a mere explosion, it was a geophysical cataclysm. The blast is estimated to have been many times more powerful than the eruption of Krakatoa. It generated tsunamis that would have scoured the northern coast of Crete, the heart of the sophisticated Minoan civilization. These were not just coastal settlements, they were hubs of maritime trade, art, and advanced architecture, like the Palace of Knossos with its intricate plumbing and vibrant frescoes. The disaster likely decimated the population and shattered the maritime networks that connected specialist communities, shipwrights, navigators, architects across the eastern Mediterranean. When those networks dissolved, the living chains of apprenticeship and the exchange of complex techniques dissolved with them. It is in the wake of such events that we find the seeds of legend. Centuries later, the Greek philosopher Plato wrote of a mighty island civilization called Atlantis, swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. While debated endlessly, many scholars see in his allegory a distant, garbled cultural memory of a real catastrophe, perhaps the Thera eruption itself, passed down through generations. The story endures because it captures a fundamental human fear, the sudden, absolute erasure of a pinnacle of achievement. This hypothesis forces us to consider the physical vulnerability of knowledge itself. Centers of learning in the ancient world were often coastal, reliant on trade and situated on fertile plains, which made them tragically exposed to tsunamis and rising sea levels. A single wave could wash away not only buildings but the master artisans and their apprentices gathered in a portside workshop. Fire was an equally ruthless censor. While the famous burning of the Library of Alexandria occurred much later, it stands as a universal symbol, a repository of scrolls, of maps, of star charts and engineering diagrams can be reduced to ash in hours, a loss from which a culture may never fully recover. Demographic collapse presents a quieter but no less effective mechanism. The plague of Justinian in the 6th century CE, or the later Black Death, did not just cause widespread loss of life, they selectively devastated dense urban centers where guilds of specialized craftsmen lived and worked in close quarters. If a master stonemason and all his senior apprentices succumbed to illness within weeks, the nuanced, hands-on knowledge of how to dress a specific type of granite for a specific purpose died with them. The chain was broken not by violence but by silence. This line of thinking leads to one of the most controversial ideas in modern archaeology, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Some researchers propose that around 12,800 years ago, fragments of a comet struck the Earth's atmosphere or surface, triggering a rapid return to Ice Age conditions. This event, they argue, could explain the simultaneous extinction of megafauna like mammoths and the abrupt disappearance of the sophisticated Clovis culture in North America. If such an impact occurred, the ensuing climate shock, fires, and floods would have been a global catastrophe, potentially resetting the course of human civilization and obliterating any concentrated pockets of advanced knowledge that may have existed. It is a speculative idea, hotly contested, but it serves a crucial purpose. It stretches our imagination to consider an obliteration so complete that it leaves almost no trace of the knowledge that was lost, only the puzzling absence of what came before. This leads to a chilling reflection for our own time. We store our collective knowledge digitally, in server farms often located in geologically stable but not invulnerable regions. We have faced global pandemics that disrupted supply chains and isolated experts. We are navigating a period of profound climate change. Are the backups of our civilization's knowledge not just the data, but the embodied skills to interpret and use it truly resilient enough to survive a civilization-scale shock? The silence following Thera suggests that societies can be far more fragile than their monuments imply. Yet, even if the masters and their libraries survived the fire and the flood, there is another, more subtle eraser lying in wait, one that attacks not the people or the parchment, but the very language needed to make sense of it all. The blueprint was not on papyrus, it was in the ruler itself. This leads us to one of the most abstract yet utterly practical forms of lost knowledge, the disappearance of a unified system of measurement. If a society loses its precise, standardized units, replicating the work of its ancestors becomes a guessing game. Think of trying to assemble a modern car engine without standardized millimeters or a shared understanding of torque. Every bolt would be a custom job, every part a potential misfit. This is the silent catastrophe of lost metrology. Across the ancient world, we find tantalizing clues of such systems. The Egyptian royal cubit, approximately 20.62 inches, was not just a length of wood. It was the foundational module for the Great Pyramid, with its base perimeter famously measuring 1,000 cubits. Even more intriguing is the megalithic yard, a unit of around 2.722 feet proposed by researcher Alexander Thom after surveying hundreds of stone circles across Britain. His analysis suggested this unit was used with remarkable consistency over vast distances. But where did these units come from and how were they maintained? Metrologist John Neal and others have proposed that these ancient standards were not arbitrary. They may have been derived from the dimensions of the Earth itself, a small fraction of the planet's polar circumference or radius, creating a measurement system in harmony with the world. This transforms a ruler from a simple tool into a cosmological statement, a way of embedding the scale of the cosmos into human construction. The practical power of such a standard is immense. A universal unit enables modular construction. If every stonecutter knows the exact length of the cubit, they can work on blocks at different quarries, confident they will all fit together perfectly on site. It allows for the planning of complex geometry on a grand scale. The proportions of the Great Pyramid, the relationship between its height and perimeter, its alignment to true north, all of this required not just measurement, but a system of interrelated measures. This is where we see the crucial distinction. Later builders might still use a cubit, but was it the same royal cubit, applied with the same geodetic and geometric intent? After the collapse of a centralized state, like the Old Kingdom in Egypt or a pan-regional megalithic culture, these standards fragment. Local rulers might introduce their own cubit. Trade between regions becomes clumsier without a common language of measure. The knowledge lost is not merely the length of a stick, but the entire intellectual framework that gave that length its meaning and its power. Look at the evolution of pyramid construction in Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza displays a breathtaking precision in its orientation and proportions, leading many to see the encoded use of the golden ratio and pi. Whether by design or remarkable coincidence, it suggests a deep geometrical consciousness. Compare this to pyramids built just centuries later in the 5th and 6th dynasties. They are smaller, less precisely aligned, and often built with a rubble core. The shift is stark. Did the builders suddenly forget the number pi? Unlikely. But they may have lost the institutional knowledge, the priestly or scholarly class, that understood how to apply those abstract principles to a monumental construction project. The sacred geometry that dictated why a wall should be exactly 117 cubits long, for a specific symbolic or harmonic reason, might have faded first. The builders were left with the how, the physical cutting, but divorced from the grand intellectual system that guided it. This is an invisible regression. You cannot see the loss of a standard in a single stone. You only see it in the accumulated imprecision of 1,000 stones, in the misaligned corners and the awkward fits. It is the loss of the shared dream that allowed 1,000 individuals to contribute to a single, perfect whole. And when that dream of perfect measure fades, it cripples the next foundational pillar of monumental achievement, the breathtaking orchestration of moving the dream from quarry to sacred site. The true test of a civilization's knowledge was not in the quarry, but in the space between. Moving a 200-ton block of granite from the Aswan quarries to the Serapeum at Saqqara, a journey of nearly 600 miles, represents a logistical puzzle that still baffles engineers today. Without modern hydraulics or diesel engines, this task demanded a symphony of forgotten arts, a form of large-scale choreography that vanished as completely as the stone-cutting techniques themselves. At the heart of this enigma are stones that defy belief, like the 3 colossal monoliths at the Roman temple complex of Baalbek in Lebanon. The largest, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, still sits in its quarry, a behemoth estimated to weigh over 1,000 tons. It is a frozen ambition, a testament to a plan so grand it was either abandoned or became impossible to execute. The question is not just how they intended to move it, but how they moved anything like it at all. Experimental archaeologist Mark Whitby, who has led projects to reconstruct ancient engineering, stresses that this knowledge was not theoretical. It was a tactile, trial-and-error wisdom gained only through generations of practice. You cannot learn the precise feel of a rope's tension or the sound of a wooden sled groaning under a critical load from a scroll. You learn it by doing and by watching a master who learned the same way. This logistical knowledge was a vast, interconnected system. It began with soil mechanics, understanding which ground could bear the immense pressure of a moving megalith and which would become a bog of mud. It involved the engineering of temporary roads, reinforced with timber and compacted gravel, that could serve as a stable highway for a months-long journey. The technology of rollers and sleds was an art form in itself, requiring specific woods that could withstand crushing weights without splintering. Lubricants, perhaps water, animal fat, or even specially prepared clays, were used to reduce friction, their recipes likely guarded secrets. Then came the ropes, each one a masterpiece of craftsmanship. Teams of workers would have spent months twisting plant fibers or leather into cables thick enough to anchor a ship, with a tensile strength that could handle the sudden, immense loads. But perhaps the most fragile knowledge of all was the human element. Coordinating hundreds, sometimes thousands, of laborers to pull in perfect unison was a feat of applied psychology and communication. It required rhythmic chants, drumbeats, or horn signals to turn a chaotic crowd into a single, pulsing engine. This was crowd psychology made manifest, a social technology as vital as any lever. The infrastructure behind the move was its own civilization. Way stations had to be established along the route with food, water, and shelter for the army of workers. This was project management on a pharaonic scale, a bureaucratic machine that had to calculate daily caloric needs, manage injuries, and maintain morale for a project that could span an entire season or longer. Some theories suggest the use of water channels, floating the stones on barges during flood seasons, or ingenious counterweight systems using earth ramps and sand pits to lower blocks into place with controlled precision. The abandonment of the Stone of the Pregnant Woman speaks volumes. It may mark the precise moment when the logistical system met its limit, when the ambition of the architects finally outpaced the practical knowledge of the engineers and foremen on the ground. This forces a profound reflection. Could the primary driver behind the sudden material downsizing we see across history be this, the loss of project management itself? A society might still remember, in theory, how to cut a perfect joint, but if it has forgotten how to feed 5,000 people for a year at a remote site, how to make a rope that won't snap, or how to command the unified heave of 1,000 souls, then the dream of megaliths becomes a fantasy. The stone must shrink because the world required to move it has already vanished. As we near the end of this historical survey, a pressing question turns from the past toward our own time. What colossal, seemingly immovable elements of our own civilization rely on a logistical and social knowledge we have come to take for granted, and how easily could that intricate system, too, be forgotten? The Saturn V rocket that took humanity to the moon no longer exists. Not the physical vehicle, but the living knowledge that built it. When the Apollo program ended, the teams of engineers who designed the mighty F-1 engines dispersed, their notebooks were archived, and the intricate, hands-on wisdom of welding those specific alloys and tuning those precise turbopumps began to fade. Decades later, when NASA wanted to understand its own past achievements for new missions, it found itself in a startling position. It had to reverse engineer the Saturn V, piecing together fragments of documentation and seeking out retired experts to recover knowledge that had slipped into the gaps of institutional memory. This is a modern, sudden material shift, not in stone but in aerospace, a transition from embodied engineering mastery to a fragile reliance on digital files and retiring minds. We are living through a similar, quiet vanishing on a global scale. Think of the digital world as our new, vast library. It holds the blueprints for nearly everything. Yet, as writer Nicholas Carr has explored, our deep immersion in this connected, instant information environment may be causing a shallowing of our own cognitive capabilities. When we outsource navigation to a GPS, we weaken our innate sense of direction. When we rely on software to correct our spelling and grammar, we erode our command of language. This is a trade-off, and it extends to physical craft. The master dry stone waller who can build a fence that stands for a century without mortar holds a geometry in his hands and eyes that is not fully captured in any manual. The artisan who knows the exact temperature and chemistry to produce the radiant blues of a cathedral's stained glass works from a recipe perfected over generations. These individuals are living repositories. As their crafts become economically niche, their knowledge risks becoming extinct, not for lack of information, but for lack of apprentices willing to dedicate a lifetime to the learning. Our global supply chains represent another profound vulnerability. We marvel at the ability to order a sophisticated device from across the planet, but this convenience masks a startling truth. Very few people, and often no single nation, possess the complete knowledge to manufacture it from scratch. The chip fabrication, the rare earth mineral processing, the precision lens grinding are all siloed in specialized hubs around the world. We have traded localized, comprehensive knowledge for distributed, hyper-efficient specialization. If those chains were severed, the knowledge to locally produce a smartphone or a modern medical scanner would not simply be recalled from a database. It would represent a catastrophic material regression, forcing societies to rebuild entire technological trees from lower branches. Even our digital archives, which seem so permanent, are fragile in ways papyrus and stone are not. Data corrupts, storage media degrades, file formats become obsolete, rendering information locked in unreadable digital vaults. There are already concerns about preserving the knowledge to maintain and decommission legacy infrastructure, such as certain nuclear power plants whose original designers are long gone. Ancient manuscripts on material science written on vellum are still readable with the human eye. A proprietary CAD file from 20 years ago may already be lost to software updates. We are creating a memory palace made of smoke. This leads to a personal and perhaps unsettling question. What specialized knowledge do you hold that isn't written down? It might be the subtle rhythm of calming a distressed child, the intuitive feel for when a mechanical sound is wrong, or the family recipe that never quite works unless you're there in the kitchen. These are the micro-knowledges that form the fabric of culture and capability. Their loss is quiet but cumulative. To combat the tide of forgetting, we must consciously choose what to carry forward. This requires recognizing that knowledge is not just data, it is a living practice. It thrives in mentorship, in hands-on doing, and in the valuing of deep focus over constant connectivity. The ancient stones teach us that preservation is an active, deliberate act. It asks us to look at our own world and identify what we truly wish to make permanent, and then to build the human chains necessary to pass it on. A laser sweeps silently across the face of a crumbling temple, capturing every crack and contour in a cloud of 1,000,000 data points. organizations like Sci-Arc are leading a quiet revolution in preservation, using three-dimensional laser scanning and photogrammetry to create digital twins of the world's most vulnerable monuments. This is not merely a high-tech photograph, it is a new form of knowledge transfer, translating physical geometry into an immortal virtual archive. A digital model preserves the precise angles of a polygonal joint, the subtle curvature of a wall, the exact dimensions of a foundation long after erosion or conflict might alter the original. It allows an engineer 10,000 miles away to study the seismic genius of an Inca wall, or a student to virtually walk through a site they may never physically visit. This digital layer becomes a new kind of memory, one that can be copied, shared, and analyzed without ever touching the sacred stone. Similarly, archaeologists like Serapeum employ satellite imagery and spectral analysis to see what the naked eye cannot. From orbit, they can detect subtle differences in soil moisture or plant growth that reveal buried foundations, lost roads, or entire settlements, creating a new map of human history written in the landscape itself. This spatial knowledge allows us to understand monuments not as isolated wonders, but as connected points within a living cultural and economic network. Alongside these digital tools, there is a deeply physical branch of this fight against forgetting: experimental archaeology. Researchers don't just study artifacts, they attempt to reconstruct the processes that created them. They build scaled-down sledges and test ancient lubricants to move replica stones. They forge copper chisels and spend weeks grinding granite with sand and water to understand the true pace and skill of the work. This hands-on replication is a dialogue with the past, where failure teaches as much as success, revealing the practical constraints and intuitive leaps of ancient engineers. Our understanding is also being rebuilt from ancient texts themselves. The rediscovery and translation of works like Vitruvius's 10 books on architecture, written for the Emperor Augustus, provided a direct window into Roman engineering principles, materials, and even the organization of a construction site. It was a partial blueprint, waiting centuries for minds capable of fully interpreting its lessons. Perhaps the most tangible victories come from material science. Using tools like X-ray diffraction and spectrometry, researchers can analyze ancient samples at a molecular level. They have reverse-engineered the legendary Roman concrete, opus cementitium, discovering that its secret ingredient, volcanic ash, creates a crystalline structure that actually heals its own cracks over time when exposed to seawater. This lost recipe, now recovered, is inspiring the development of more durable and sustainable modern concrete, a direct transfer of knowledge across 2 millennia. These efforts represent a profound shift from passive observation to active recovery, yet this positive turn invites a crucial reflection. Does creating a perfect digital backup of a monument or a chemical analysis of its mortar give us a false sense of security? We may preserve the what and the how with incredible fidelity, but can a hard drive ever hold the embodied wisdom, the tactile feel, the problem-solving intuition of the master mason? Digital immortality for data is not the same as the living continuity of a craft. As we integrate these powerful new tools, we are forced to re-evaluate our oldest assumptions. The very act of scanning, testing, and reconstructing reveals how much we still have to learn from the silent stones, and underscores that the ultimate preservation may lie in combining the unerring memory of the machine with the irreplaceable insight of the practicing human hand. A single new discovery can shatter a century of academic consensus. In 2021, researchers applied advanced luminescence dating to the smaller bluestones at Stonehenge, and the results sent ripples through the archaeological world. The stones, it seemed, might have been part of an earlier, different monument in Wales before being moved to Salisbury Plain, suggesting a construction narrative spanning centuries and involving multiple cultural phases. This revelation doesn't just add years to a timeline, it fundamentally blurs our understanding of what a sudden shift even means. Was the transition from one building culture to another a clean break, or a slow, messy process of adaptation and reuse that our crude dating methods previously compressed into a single event? This is the dynamic, often uncomfortable process of re-evaluation now underway, fueled by technologies that let us see the past with new eyes. Archaeologist David Wengrow, in his work The Dawn of Everything, argues compellingly against the ingrained myth of linear human progress, that inevitable climb from simplicity to complexity. He presents evidence of ancient societies that experimented with different forms of social organization, sometimes cycling between large-scale monument building and more egalitarian, dispersed living. This framework reframes our entire puzzle. A material shift might not signal a loss of knowledge at all, but a conscious societal choice to invest energy elsewhere to value different things. The knowledge may have been dormant, not deleted. Our challenge is to stop seeing history as a single, upward staircase and start seeing it as a sprawling landscape of possibilities, where cultures move laterally, adopting and abandoning techniques as their values and circumstances change. This new vision is being painted in startling detail by technology like LiDAR, which uses lasers to peer through dense forest canopy. In the jungles of Cambodia, it revealed the true scale of Angkor, a vast, low-density urban network far larger than anyone imagined. In the Amazon, it uncovered intricate geometric earthworks and sophisticated settlements, proving the rainforest was not a pristine wilderness but a carefully managed, built environment supporting complex societies. These discoveries are revolutionary because they find monumental sophistication precisely where traditional archaeology, limited by visible ruins, assumed there was little. They force us to ask, how many other centers of advanced knowledge have we missed simply because they built with earth and wood instead of stone, materials that melt back into the landscape? It is a humbling reminder that our map of the ancient world is still mostly blank, filled with assumptions that each new survey can erase. Parallel insights are coming from the study of ancient DNA, which traces the movement of people across continents. We can now see waves of migration, interactions, and replacements that happened long before written records. This genetic map adds a crucial human layer to the puzzle of material shifts. Did a new building style arrive with a new population carrying their own techniques? Or did a stable population experience a cultural revolution, adopting foreign ideas through trade and contact? The mysterious sea peoples of the Bronze Age collapse are a classic example. While their exact origins are debated, genetic studies are beginning to identify population movements around the Mediterranean during that turbulent period, offering hard data to complement the tales of invasion etched in Egyptian hieroglyphs. Knowledge transfer, it seems, walks on two legs. Sometimes the evidence is a baffling artifact in a trench. Archaeologists frequently uncover tools whose purpose is utterly unclear. Oddly shaped stone objects, peculiar copper alloys, or composite items that fit no known function. The ongoing debate over their use is a microcosm of our struggle. Are they evidence of a lost technology we can't comprehend, or simply a mundane tool we've failed to recognize because its context is gone? Each interpretation carries weight. To dismiss them as ritual objects can be a cop-out, a way to file away the inexplicable. To insist they are proof of advanced tech can drift into speculation. The truth likely lies in a middle ground, where these objects represent applications of common knowledge to specialized tasks that have since vanished, leaving the tool as a silent, stubborn question. No site embodies this paradigm-shifting power more than Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Discovered in the 1990s, This complex of massive, carved stone pillars arranged in circles was built around 11,500 years ago by hunter-gatherers, millennia before the invention of agriculture or settled life. It turned the standard narrative of civilization on its head. We always believed that complex society, division of labor, and monumental architecture were results of the agricultural revolution, born from surplus and stability. Göbekli Tepe suggests the opposite, that the collective will to build something monumental on this scale may have been the catalyst that brought people together, fostering the social organization that later led to farming and cities. Here, the material shift is not a regression, but a shocking, precocious beginning. It proves that the capacity for grand, coordinated stonework existed far earlier and in very different social contexts than we ever dreamed. Its discovery didn't just add a chapter to history, it required us to tear up the old table of contents and start again. This is the essential, humbling lesson for our search. Every tool, from the trowel to the satellite, is revealing a past more intricate, more creative, and more surprising than the tidy stories we once told. The theories we hold today about lost knowledge transfer, including the ones explored in this very narrative, are built on the best evidence we have now. But they are provisional. How many will be overturned tomorrow by a drone survey in a remote desert, or a new way to analyze residue on a stone tool, or a young student asking a question everyone else had overlooked? This intellectual humility is not an admission of defeat, but the prerequisite for true discovery. It prepares us for the final, integrative step, where we must weave these threads of evidence, technology, and shattered paradigms into a coherent picture of what these silent stones are trying to tell us about the fragility and resilience of human genius. The silent stones do not whisper a single, simple answer. After tracing the threads of collapse, conquest, economics, and environmental change, a clear pattern emerges. No lone villain explains every architectural regression across time and continent. The truth is more intricate, a web of interconnected vulnerabilities. We must now synthesize these clues into a coherent framework, a model for how monumental knowledge truly vanishes. Think of a civilization's advanced building knowledge not as a book on a shelf, but as a living, breathing ecosystem. This ecosystem has several essential components. First, the human component, the guilds of masters and apprentices holding tacit, hands-on skills. Second, the economic and political component, the stable patronage and surplus resources that fund decades-long projects. Third, the material component, access to specific quarries, timber, and chemical recipes. And fourth, the spiritual component, the cultural meaning that justifies such a staggering investment of human energy. This entire ecosystem is fragile. It thrives on continuity. A major shock to any one of these pillars can cause the entire system to wobble. But for knowledge to be truly lost, not just paused, the shock must be severe enough to break multiple pillars at once. The nature of that shock then writes the signature of the loss. A volcanic cataclysm like Thera likely shattered the human and material networks of Minoan seafaring culture in a single, violent event. The slow creep of deforestation and drought in the Maya world eroded the economic and material foundations until the system was no longer viable. The Roman Empire's political fragmentation did not kill every engineer, but it utterly dissolved the bureaucratic and logistical machine that made their knowledge applicable on an imperial scale. This leads to the final, crucial stage, the response of the society that remains. Survival dictates new priorities. If the old gods are overthrown, their temples become quarries for new faiths. If survival means constant defense, building gets faster and focuses on fortification, not perfection. If the grand patrons are gone, projects shrink to a local scale. The surviving culture becomes a filter, deciding which fragments of the old knowledge are still useful. Those fragments are not lost, they are transformed. Consider the vivid example of Europe after the fall of Rome. The collapse of the imperial system was the catastrophic shock. The intricate knowledge of making Roman concrete, of large-scale aqueduct engineering, and of coordinating vast labor forces faded from common use because the world that required them was gone. The ecosystem that sustained that knowledge had collapsed, but the society that emerged had urgent new needs. It needed defensible strongholds and places of worship. So what happened? The knowledge of stone cutting and vaulting, a lesser art in the Roman concrete world, was not lost. It was adapted. It evolved in the direction the new world demanded. The thick, protective walls of Norman castles and the soaring stone ribs of Gothic cathedrals are not a regression from the Roman pantheon. They are a brilliant branching, a direct evolution of retained masonry knowledge applied to a completely different set of cultural imperatives, defense and divine aspiration. This multi-causal framework allows for nuance. It explains why the Incas might have retained exquisite polygonal masonry for sacred, seismic Cusco, while using faster methods for agricultural terraces. It explains why the secret of Egyptian pyramid construction might not have been stolen, but simply became an irrelevant extravagance for later pharaohs facing different political and economic realities. Knowledge is rarely erased completely. More often, it is fragmented, its pieces scattered. Some fragments are discarded when they no longer serve a purpose. Others are picked up, sanded down, and fitted into the new structure of a changed world. The megalithic method might vanish, but the basic geometry of the right angle persists. The recipe for waterproof bitumen mortar might be forgotten, but the understanding of stacking bricks remains. This framework moves us beyond the simplistic idea of a dark age following a golden age. Instead, we see a constant process of remembering and forgetting, of prioritizing and adapting, driven by the relentless pressures of a changing world. It suggests that the haunting perfection of a bygone monument is not a taunt about our ancestors' superiority, but a mirror showing us the specific conditions that allowed such a flowering of focused human genius. And it forces a final, inevitable question about our own place in this cycle. If our civilization's knowledge is also an ecosystem, what shocks is it resilient to, and what new priorities might the future demand that could render our own pinnacles of technology into curious, half-understood relics? A library of human knowledge exists, but its shelves are not fixed. Volumes are constantly being rewritten, some misplaced entirely, their profound contents surviving only as simplified summaries in later editions. This is the deeper philosophical ground our journey across fallen stones has led us to. We are forced to ask if human civilization itself is caught in a perpetual cycle, a rhythm of discovery, a fragile peak, a shattering fragmentation, and then, centuries later, a painstaking, partial rediscovery. The philosopher John Gray offers a sobering perspective, reminding us that progress is not a law of history, but a story we tell ourselves. Civilizations, he notes, are ephemeral things, blooms that rise and fall against the vast, indifferent backdrop of geological time. Their knowledge is not a permanent acquisition, but a temporary possession held in trust for a fleeting moment. This realization reframes every ancient wall. They are not failures of progress, but monuments to a different understanding of time, one where the permanence of the work was an act of faith against the certainty of eventual forgetting. Within this cycle, we must distinguish between two fundamental kinds of knowing. The ancient Greeks had precise words for them. Techn is practical, embodied skill, the craftsman's feel for the chisel, the mason's intuitive grasp of balance and leverage. Episteme is theoretical understanding, the abstract principles of geometry, physics, and material science. In a collapse which is more easily lost, the evidence in the stone suggests Techn is the more fragile. You can write down the Pythagorean theorem, preserving the episteme of a right triangle's properties on a scroll that might survive a fire. but the master's knowledge of how to apply that theorem to cut a 100-ton polygonal block so it locks with its neighbors that lived in his muscles and his eyes. That techn evaporates when the chain of apprenticeship breaks. The theoretical blueprint can survive the dark age, but without the hands to interpret it, it becomes a beautiful, useless poem. This leads to a more unsettling possibility. Could some knowledge be deliberately shelved, not lost to catastrophe, but consciously set aside by a culture that deems it too dangerous or destabilizing? We see shadows of this in our own time with debates over certain technologies. In antiquity, imagine a guild that discovers a method of construction so efficient, so revolutionary, it threatens the entire social and economic order built around monumental labor. Or a chemical process so potent it becomes a secret too perilous to share. The knowledge isn't forgotten, it is purposely withdrawn, allowed to fade into legend because its cost to the existing world is judged too high. This is knowledge not as a victim of collapse but as a sacrifice to stability. And what of the legends themselves? We often dismiss myth and religion as pre-scientific explanations. But in the context of catastrophic resets, they may serve a vital, practical function. They become the sturdy vessels, the narrative arcs, designed to carry kernels of essential knowledge across the flood. The story of a great flood is found in cultures worldwide, a possible memory of post-ice age sea level rise. The legend of a plant that softens stone may encode a real botanical recipe. The tale of gods who built with mighty stones may preserve the awe of a lost techn. These stories are durable, passed orally for generations. They are the cultural backup system, preserving truth in the only format guaranteed to survive when libraries burn and cities are abandoned, the compelling, memorable story. They are episteme disguised as epic, waiting for a future generation to decipher the code. No object symbolizes this poignant cycle of peak and loss more perfectly than the Antikythera Mechanism. Recovered from a 2,000-year-old shipwreck, this intricate bronze device of gears and dials was, for its time, an analog computer of staggering complexity. It could predict eclipses, track the cycles of the Olympic Games, and model the irregular motions of the planets. It represents a dazzling peak of Hellenistic techn and episteme combined, a mechanical expression of cosmic understanding. And then it was gone. The knowledge to create such a device vanished from the Mediterranean world for over a millennium. It was not needed for survival in the centuries that followed, so it faded, its principles waiting to be independently reinvented much later. Its silent gears ask us what pinnacles of our own understanding might one day be regarded as curious, inexplicable artifacts. This brings us to a final, personal reflection, the core of a concluding message. If knowledge is this fragile, if civilizations are this ephemeral, what is our responsibility? We are the current stewards of the human library. Our era is unique in that we possess both the digital means to preserve episteme at an unprecedented scale and the global awareness of how many volumes have already gone missing. Stewardship, then, becomes an active choice. It means valuing and supporting the living masters of techn, the craftspeople and artisans, not just as nostalgia, but as essential keepers of irreplaceable hands-on wisdom. It means designing our digital archives not for the next decade, but for the next millennium, with formats meant to outlive our software. It means listening to the old stories with new ears, asking what practical truths they might cradle. And on a personal level, it means recognizing the knowledge we each hold, that quiet understanding of a skill or a tradition, and consciously choosing to pass it on. The great stones teach us that permanence is an illusion, but continuity is a choice. Our task is not to build pyramids that will never fall, but to tend the fire of understanding so it can be carried forward through whatever night may come. Our own civilization has built its greatest monument not from stone but from silicon and light. The global digital network is our pyramid, a wonder of instant connection and stored knowledge. Yet its fragility mirrors the ancient trade routes that once collapsed, severing the flow of ideas and materials. The study of forgotten techniques is far more than an academic puzzle. It is a practical guidebook for resilience, offering urgent lessons for how we might fortify our own world against a similar fate. The first lesson is to diversify. Just as ancient knowledge lived in the hands of the mason, the songs of the laborers, and the scrolls of the scribe, our critical knowledge must exist in multiple forms. We rely overwhelmingly on one medium, the digital, stored on servers vulnerable to power loss, cyber attacks, and the simple decay of file formats over time. We must actively invest in what resilience theorists like Thomas Homer Dixon call modularity and redundancy. This means creating robust analog backups for our most vital data, from cultural archives to scientific blueprints, etched onto durable media or preserved in widely distributed physical libraries. It means fostering master-apprentice relationships in fields where tacit knowledge is irreplaceable, from advanced manufacturing and infrastructure maintenance to sustainable agriculture and medicine. When a veteran engineer can pass on the intuitive feel for a machine's vibration to a younger colleague, that is knowledge no manual can fully capture. We must also consciously value deep, hands-on understanding over the convenience of shallow, push-button automation. Knowing how to repair, to adapt, and to build from first principles is the ultimate hedge against systemic failure. This philosophy is already yielding tangible innovations. Material scientists studying the forgotten recipe of Roman seawater concrete have decoded its self-healing properties. This ancient insight is now inspiring the development of new, more durable, and lower-carbon concretes for modern construction, a direct transfer of sustainable knowledge across 2 millennia. Similarly, architects are looking to the passive cooling techniques of ancient desert structures and the seismic flexibility of dry stone walls to design more resilient and energy-efficient buildings. This is not nostalgia, it is intelligent adaptation, mining the past for solutions to contemporary challenges. On a personal level, this practical turn invites a simple question. In your own field, craft, or even family tradition, what fragile knowledge are you the temporary steward of? It might be the subtle technique for a perfect weld, the family recipe that relies on a specific touch, or the local wisdom for reading weather patterns. The act of consciously passing it on, of writing it down, of teaching it patiently to someone else, is a revolutionary act of continuity. It builds a human chain against the tide of forgetting. Our technological civilization stands at a peak of its own making, but the stones of antiquity remind us that no peak is permanent. Their silent testimony is not one of despair, but of clear-eyed hope. They show us that the most enduring legacy is not the unshakable monument, but the living, adaptable thread of understanding passed from one generation to the next. Our greatest task is to tend that thread, to weave it with intention, and to ensure that the light of knowledge in all its diverse and embodied forms never fully goes out. The journey began with a simple, unsettling observation in stone. A civilization that could move 70-ton granite blocks later struggled to fit smaller ones without rivers of mortar. This was our entry point into a global pattern, a phenomenon we named the sudden material shift. From the perfect joints of Giza to the polygonal puzzles of Sacsayhuamán, from the baked perfection of Mesopotamian brick to the tumbled Cyclopean walls of Mycenae, we followed this architectural regression like a detective tracing a cold case across continents and millennia. We examined the suspects. Was it the fragile, unspoken knowledge of the master's hand, severed when a guild died out? Was it the thunderclap of societal collapse as seen in the late Bronze Age, scattering engineers and erasing logistical blueprints? Could it have been the deliberate overwriting of a conquest, where new rulers imposed their own architectural language atop the old? Or perhaps it was a quiet, rational choice, an economic pivot toward faster, cheaper methods, making the old mastery a luxury no longer worth the cost. We even ventured into the realm of the speculative, considering lost chemistries or acoustic principles, and confronted the sobering power of a changing environment to render once brilliant techniques obsolete. The evidence pointed not to one culprit but to a web of vulnerabilities. We then turned the mirror on ourselves, recognizing our own fragile digital networks and specialized supply chains as modern versions of the same precarious knowledge ecosystem. This led to a synthesis. These shifts are not failures of intelligence, but signatures of a complex system under stress. They mark the moment when the intricate ecosystem supporting a pinnacle of knowledge, the hands, the resources, the cultural will, fractures and realigns. The final takeaway reframes everything. These silent, stoic ruins are not relics of a primitive past we have surpassed. They are dynamic archives, recording the breathtaking heights human collaboration can reach and the sobering ease with which those heights can be forgotten. Their story is a profound lesson in humility and continuity. It challenges the myth of linear progress and replaces it with a more realistic, cyclical understanding of human achievement, one of brilliant peaks, deep valleys, and the enduring, fragile thread of understanding we must consciously choose to pass on. These architectural fingerprints point toward a more subtle and powerful truth. After tracing the evidence from quarries to collapsed empires, we can now answer the core question with greater clarity. The sudden material shifts we see etched in stone are not proof of a single, forgotten super-civilization, nor are they mere accidents of style. They are something far more revealing. They are the physical signatures of a rupture in a complex, living system. Think of a civilization's highest craft knowledge not as a book you can close and reopen, but as a vibrant, delicate ecosystem. This ecosystem requires specific conditions to thrive: the master's hands, the apprentice's attention, the patron's wealth, the stable trade routes for materials, and the cultural belief that makes the monumental effort meaningful. When one of these elements fails, the system strains. When several fail at once, the system can shatter. The result is a historical discontinuity, a broken chain. The precise technique for dressing a 100-ton block isn't stolen by time. It evaporates when the guild that held it is disbanded by conquest, when the economic surplus needed for a 20-year project dries up, or when a changing climate severs access to the sacred quarry. The shift in material is the archaeological echo of that fracture. It tells us that something profound happened here, not just a change of king, but a reordering of the world that made the old way of building impossible to sustain. This loss is rarely total. It is often selective, a filtering process dictated by the new reality. The breathtaking scale and precision of the Serapeum sarcophagi may vanish, but the basic understanding of how to stack stones remains. The explanatory knowledge, the deep why of the geometry, might fade into myth, while the procedural knowledge, the simplified how, is adapted for smaller projects. The legendary memory of giants who built the walls persists long after the practical skill to move the megaliths is gone. This makes these material shifts a powerful diagnostic tool for historians. They are less about measuring the limits of ancient genius and more about mapping the vulnerabilities of human societies to the relentless pressures of time, conflict, and change. When we see a wall transition from seamless polygonal fits to cruder, mortared blocks, we are not looking at a decline in intelligence. We are looking at a society that has likely undergone a seismic event, one that forced it to reallocate its energy, to prioritize speed over permanence, or to rebuild with the fragments of a shattered technical tradition. This refined understanding changes how we view history itself. It moves us away from a simple story of peaks and valleys, of golden ages and dark ages, and toward a more realistic view of human civilization as a constant process of remembering, adapting, and inevitably forgetting. Each monument becomes a time capsule, preserving not just the height of its builder's ambition, but the precise moment when the ecosystem that supported that ambition began to transform. The stones, therefore, ask us to look beyond the artifact to the invisible web of people, resources, and ideas that brought it into being, and to recognize how fragile that web has always been. The silent stones do more than puzzle us, they captivate us. This deep, enduring allure is not just about solving an archaeological riddle. It speaks to something fundamental in the human spirit, a profound sense of wonder. We are drawn to these gaps in the historical record because they suggest our past is grander and more mysterious than the textbooks often allow. There is a romance to the idea of forgotten peaks, of ancestors who possessed insights that shimmer just beyond our grasp. It satisfies a quiet longing for a world where human achievement felt more connected to the sacred, where building a temple was an act of communion with the cosmos, not merely a feat of engineering. This mystery gently challenges our modern assumption of inevitable progress. We live in an age of stunning technology, yet we look at a 4,000-year-old granite box, polished to a mirror finish, and cannot fully explain its creation with our own tools. That humility is bracing. It whispers that our current pinnacle may not be the only one humanity has ever reached, and it may not be the last. The stakes of this puzzle are incredibly high because it questions the very arc of our story. Are we on a steady, upward climb, or are we walking a path with many lost trails and abandoned summits? Each unfinished obelisk, each polygonal wall that defies earthquakes, is a permanent question. They are not ruins in the sense of something broken. They are eternal inquiries made of stone, placed there by our own kind across the gulf of centuries. They invite every new generation to look, to measure, and to wonder. This is why the search persists. It is fueled by a restless curiosity that new technologies like LIDAR scanning and satellite archaeology only sharpen, not satisfy. The quest itself, this collective drive to understand, becomes a vital form of knowledge transfer in its own right. It is how we pass forward not just data, but the spark of awe, ensuring the conversation with our ancestors never truly ends. This conversation with the stones is yours to continue. Your role in this mystery is not as a passive listener, but as an active explorer. The most powerful tool for understanding these ancient shifts is not in a distant laboratory, but in your own perspective. If you have the opportunity, visit a local historical site, a stone wall, an old foundation, or even a centuries-old building in your own town. Look closely. Run your fingers along the joints between the stones. Are they tight or filled with mortar? Are the blocks uniform or irregular? Ask yourself the simple, profound questions we have explored. Why this material here? Why does the craftsmanship change from one section to another? You are now reading a language written in rock, and every site becomes a page in a global story. This direct observation is the first step toward a deeper, personal connection with the puzzle of the past. Your exploration will naturally lead you to research, and here, a crucial balance is required. Read widely and voraciously, but also read critically. Delve into the meticulous work of academic archaeologists who piece together history from pottery shards and soil layers. Then, with an open but discerning mind, consider the broader theories proposed by alternative researchers who connect dots across continents and epochs. The vibrant tension between these perspectives is not a weakness, it is the engine of discovery. Learn to evaluate evidence. A grand claim requires substantial proof. Does the theory rely on a single anomalous artifact, or does it account for the full, messy tapestry of the archaeological record? Enjoy the debate, for it is in the clash of ideas that our understanding is refined and sometimes revolutionized. Knowledge grows through sharing. Discuss these ideas with friends, family, or online communities. When you articulate a concept, you solidify your own understanding. When you listen to a counterpoint, you challenge your assumptions. This simple act of conversation is a profound form of knowledge preservation, a living chain of inquiry that prevents ideas from being siloed and forgotten. Furthermore, look to your own life. Do you possess a skill, a family tradition, or a craft? It might be woodworking, gardening, cooking a signature dish, or even the nuanced way you calm a child. That is your personal repository of tacit knowledge. Consider how you might document it, not just in steps, but in the feel and the intuition behind it. Mentor someone, pass it on. In doing so, you participate directly in the ancient, vital act of knowledge transfer, strengthening the human network against loss. This call to action rests on two pillars. First, nurture an insatiable curiosity. Let the unexplained smoothness of an ancient granite box or the impossible fit of a polygonal wall ignite your imagination. Let that spark drive you to learn more about geology, ancient languages, or engineering principles. Curiosity is the fuel for all exploration. Second, and equally important, temper that curiosity with disciplined critical thinking. Learn to distinguish between a peer-reviewed journal article and a compelling narrative built on selective facts. Embrace the mystery but demand rigor. The goal is not to choose a side blindly, but to navigate the fascinating gray area between established science and tantalizing possibility with both wonder and wisdom. By uniting a curious heart with a critical mind, you become far more than a viewer of history. You become a responsible participant in humanity's greatest ongoing story. You become a guardian of questions, a preserver of wonder, and an active link in the chain that stretches back to the first stones ever set with intention. The monuments of the past ask their silent questions. It is now your turn to listen, to investigate, and to contribute your own voice to the eternal conversation about who we are and what we are capable of remembering. The pyramid stands as a testament not to what was lost but to what is possible. Our journey began with its silent, imposing form, a symbol of timeless achievement set against the puzzling reality of its less sophisticated successors. This investigation into sudden material shifts has revealed a historical landscape far richer and more complex than a simple story of forgetting. We have traced knowledge not as a static library, but as a living, breathing entity, fragile and deeply woven into the fabric of society itself. These architectural regressions are not marks of failure, but profound historical stress markers. They tell silent tales of societal collapse, of pragmatic adaptation to new realities, and sometimes of conscious cultural reinvention. They challenge the comforting narrative of civilization as a relentless upward climb, revealing instead a terrain of soaring peaks and deep valleys, where profound understanding can slip into the troughs between eras. The physicist Isaac Newton once wrote, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Our exploration suggests a haunting corollary to this beautiful idea. Sometimes, over the long arc of history, those giants and the full scope of their understanding can vanish from view, leaving later generations to slowly, painstakingly, rediscover the very height of their shoulders. This is not a cause for despair, but a call for clear-eyed stewardship. The ultimate lesson etched in these ancient stones is one of humility and active care. It urges us to cherish, to diligently document, and to consciously pass on the profound and practical knowledge we are custodians of today. For in that continuous, intentional act of transfer lies our best hope for resilience. Thank you for exploring this enduring mystery with us. If this journey into the forgotten corners of history sparked your curiosity, consider subscribing for more. We would love to hear your thoughts on these material shifts and what they might tell us about our own world in the comments below.